The evening air was crisp as a well-dressed businessman checked his watch outside La Maison Rouge, San Francisco's most talked-about French restaurant. His dark wool coat and Italian leather shoes spoke of success, yet the moment he approached the gold-trimmed entrance, the atmosphere shifted noticeably. Two security guards exchanged quick glances before stepping forward, their stance immediately defensive. The businessman had seen that look before. The subtle shift in body language, the instant judgment made before he could even speak. He'd dealt with it throughout his journey from a small-town kid to a tech industry leader, but it never stopped stinging. "Good evening," he said warmly, reaching for his phone. "I have a reservation for 8 p.m. The taller guard cleared his throat, not even bothering to look at the phone screen. "I'm sorry, sir, but we're fully booked tonight." Behind him, through the restaurant's elegant windows, several empty tables were clearly visible, their white tablecloths pristine under the soft chandelier light. The businessman kept his composure, though his heart rate picked up slightly. He'd learned long ago that showing any sign of frustration in these situations only made things worse. "There must be some mistake," he said calmly, turning his phone screen toward them. "I made this reservation 2 weeks ago. See, it's right here, confirmed by your booking system." The second guard stepped closer, his hand resting unnecessarily on his radio. "Sir, perhaps you're confused about the venue. This is La Maison Rouge, a fine dining establishment." The emphasis on fine dining carried an unmistakable message. Inside, other diners were beginning to stare. A couple being seated at a window table quickly looked away when he caught their eye. The maitre did. A thin man with graying temples hurried over, his face a mask of practiced concern. "Is there a problem here?" the maitre d' asked, directing his question to the guards rather than the businessman. "This gentleman claims to have a reservation," the first guard said, his tone making it clear he doubted both the reservation and the word gentleman. The businessman took a deep breath, remembering his mentor's words from years ago. Success isn't just about proving them wrong. It's about staying true to yourself when they try to drag you down. He built his tech company from nothing, turning his small startup into $1 million enterprise. He'd faced skeptics, doubters, and prejudiced investors, but he'd never let their narrow-mindedness define him. "My name is right here," he said firmly, still maintaining his dignity. "I have a table for 4. I'm meeting potential investors to discuss a new tech venture." He didn't mention that the venture was valued at several $1,000,000, or that he was actually looking to acquire new properties. Some things were better left unsaid for now. The maitre d' barely glanced at the phone. "I'm afraid there's been a mistake in our system. We are unable to accommodate you this evening. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at one of the establishments downtown." He gestured vaguely toward the less prestigious part of the city. More patrons were watching now, some with discomfort, others with poorly concealed interest in the unfolding scene. A young waitress behind the maitre d' looked embarrassed, quickly turning away to busy herself with folding napkins. The businessman felt a familiar weight in his chest, not of shame, but of tired recognition. He'd been here before, at different doors, with different faces, but the same story. Yet something felt different this time. Maybe it was because he'd just closed a major deal, or maybe he'd simply reached his limit of accepting such treatment. "I'd like to speak to your owner," he said quietly, his voice carrying an authority that made the maitre d' blink. "The owner isn't available," came the swift reply. "And I must ask you to leave now. We have guests arriving." The guards moved closer, making their intentions clear. One of them reached for his arm, but the businessman stepped back smoothly. "Don't worry," he said, his voice clear and steady. "I'm leaving. But I want you to remember my face. You'll be seeing it again." As he turned to walk away, he pulled out his phone again, not to show his reservation this time, but to make a call. He had a friend in commercial real estate who'd mentioned something interesting about this very restaurant just last week. Something about financial troubles and a quiet search for buyers. The night air no longer felt crisp, it felt electric with possibility. Sometimes the best way to change a broken system wasn't to fight it head-on, but to transform it from within. As he walked to his car, a plan was already forming in his mind. He'd learned long ago that success was the best answer to prejudice, and he was about to give these people a masterclass in both business and human dignity. The drive home that night was different from the countless others he'd experienced after similar encounters. The city lights blurred past his car windows as his mind raced with possibilities. He'd built his tech empire by turning obstacles into opportunities, and tonight's humiliation was about to become his biggest opportunity yet. His phone buzzed with messages from the investors he was supposed to meet. He pulled over to respond, explaining the situation honestly but professionally. To his surprise, their responses were immediate and supportive. One message particularly caught his eye. "We've heard rumors about La Maison Rouge's financial troubles. Maybe it's time for new management." Back in his home office, he loosened his tie and began his research. The restaurant's reputation had been built over 20 years, but their recent reviews told a different story. Comments about selective service and inconsistent welcome appeared frequently. The businessman smiled slightly. He wasn't the only one who'd noticed their discriminatory practices. His fingers flew across the keyboard as he dug deeper into public records. The restaurant's parent company had filed for refinancing twice in the past year. Property taxes were overdue and their liquor license renewal was pending. The proud establishment was quietly crumbling behind its golden facade. He reached for his phone again, this time calling his financial advisor. "Remember that investment fund we set aside for restaurant ventures? I think I found the perfect opportunity." As he explained his encounter and subsequent discoveries, his advisor's initial skepticism turned to intrigue. "They're asking for $5 million, his advisor confirmed after some quick research. "But given their debt situation, we could probably get it for $3.5. The location alone is worth that much." The businessman leaned back in his chair, memories of the evening's humiliation still fresh. The guards' dismissive looks, the maitre d's condescension, the staring patrons, it all fueled his determination. But this wasn't about revenge. It was about change, about transformation, about showing that excellence and inclusivity could go hand in hand. He spent the next few hours making calls, each one a careful step in his developing plan. His legal team was enthusiastic. They'd been wanting to expand into restaurant acquisitions. His PR team was practically giddy at the potential story. Even his usually cautious risk assessor gave a tentative green light. Around midnight, his phone rang. It was his commercial real estate contact. "You're not going to believe this," his friend said, excitement clear in his voice. "The owner's getting desperate. He's got a big tax payment due next week, and his last potential buyer just backed out. He's willing to entertain immediate offers." The businessman smiled, opening his laptop to draft an email. "Set up a meeting for tomorrow morning. Early, and make sure our offer looks like it's coming from my investment company, not me personally." He paused, remembering the guards' faces. "Let's keep my name out of it for now." As he worked through the night, his mind kept returning to the empty tables he'd seen through the restaurant's windows. Soon those tables would be filled with diners of all backgrounds, enjoying not just excellent food, but true hospitality. The chandelier light that had illuminated his rejection would soon shine on a new kind of fine dining experience. He thought about the young waitress who looked uncomfortable with her colleagues' behavior. She, and staff like her, would be part of the change. This wasn't just about buying a restaurant, it was about creating an example of how businesses should operate in a modern, inclusive world. Dawn was breaking when he finally finished his preparation. The papers were ready, the finances arranged, and his team was on standby. In a few hours, he would walk into a meeting that would change not just his life, but the lives of everyone connected to La Maison Rouge. As he finally headed to bed for a few hours' rest, he glanced at his reflection in the hallway mirror. He saw the same face that the guards had judged so quickly, but now it wore a subtle smile. Tomorrow, that face would become their boss, but more importantly, it would become a symbol of change in an industry long overdue for transformation. His phone buzzed one last time, a message from his mentor. "Remember, the best revenge isn't just success. It's success that paves the way for others." He smiled, setting his alarm. In just a few hours, he would begin turning last night's humiliation into tomorrow's triumph. The morning meeting was set for 7 a.m. at his lawyer's office downtown. He arrived early, dressed in the same expensive suit from the previous night. A subtle reminder of the irony about to unfold. The restaurant owner, a man in his 60s with gray hair and tired eyes, was already waiting in the conference room, flanked by his financial advisor. The businessman could see the desperation in the owner's posture. 20 years of success had led to complacency, and complacency had led to this moment. The restaurant's books lay open on the table, telling a story of declining revenues and mounting debts. Health inspection reports showed recent violations, and employee turnover rates were climbing. "Let's get straight to business," the owner said, his voice carrying a mix of resignation and relief. "Your offer is lower than what we initially wanted, but given our situation..." He trailed off, shuffling through papers that detailed just how dire that situation was. The businessman nodded, keeping his expression neutral. $3.5 million, all cash, with the deal closed by end of day. "We'll take on all existing staff contracts and outstanding debts." He paused, letting that sink in. It was a lifeline, and everyone in the room knew it. His lawyer started distributing documents, each page representing another step toward his vision. The owner barely glanced at them before signing, his pen moving with the haste of someone escaping a sinking ship. His financial advisor, however, studied each page carefully, occasionally whispering questions that the owner waved off. "There's one unusual clause here," the advisor noted, pointing to a section near the end. "The current owner and management must be present at the restaurant this evening for the ownership transition announcement." The businessman watched as they read this requirement, his face revealing nothing. "Just a formality," he said smoothly. "It helps with staff morale during ownership changes." The owner shrugged and signed that page too, probably assuming it was a standard corporate procedure. As the morning progressed, more papers were signed, more details confirmed. The businessman's team had thought of everything, from assuming supplier contracts to managing reservation transitions. By 10 a.m., La Maison Rouge had a new owner, though none of its current staff knew it yet. After the owner left, visibly relieved to have escaped his financial troubles, the businessman gathered his team. "Phase 1 is complete," he said, allowing himself a small smile. "Now for Phase 2. His PR team began distributing their carefully prepared press releases, while his HR representatives reviewed the current staff files. He spent the afternoon in meetings with his restaurant management consultants, planning the changes that would begin tomorrow. The menu would stay largely the same. La Maison Rouge's food had never been the problem. But everything else, from hiring practices to customer service protocols, would be transformed. Looking through the staff files, he paused at the security guard's records. Both had multiple customer complaints that had been quietly buried. The maitri's file showed a pattern of selective seating arrangements that couldn't be explained by any legitimate business practice. "We'll need to implement comprehensive training programs," he told his HR director. "Some staff will resist the changes. Some might quit. That's fine. Change isn't always comfortable." He thought about the young waitress who'd shown discomfort at his treatment. "But I believe some of them will embrace a more inclusive vision." As evening approached, he reviewed his plans one final time. The owner would be there, as required by contract. The regular dinner service would begin normally. Then, at precisely 8 p.m., the same time as his rejected reservation, everything would change. His phone buzzed with messages from various team members confirming their positions. Legal representatives were ready. HR personnel were standing by. Even local media had been quietly notified to expect an interesting story about one of the city's most exclusive restaurants. The businessman stood before his mirror, adjusting his tie. Tonight, he would walk through those doors again, but this time, no one would dare stop him. Yet his goal wasn't humiliation or revenge, it was transformation. He would show them a different way of doing business, a better way of treating people. He checked his watch, 7:30 p.m. Time to head back to La Maison Rouge. This time, though, he wasn't going as a customer hoping to be served. He was going as the owner, ready to serve a lesson in dignity, respect, and the true meaning of hospitality. The evening traffic moved slowly through San Francisco's streets as the businessman's car approached La Maison Rouge. This time, he wasn't alone. His legal team followed in another vehicle, while his HR director and PR manager waited at a cafe across the street. The restaurant's golden lights glowed just as they had the night before, but tonight they seemed to shine with anticipation rather than exclusion. He parked his car and checked his watch, 7:55 p.m. Through the windows, he could see the dinner service in full swing. The same guards stood at their posts, unaware that their world was about to change. The maitre d' was visible too, fawning over some wealthy-looking guests while dismissing others with practiced disdain. His phone buzzed with a message from his lawyer. All documents processed. Ownership transfer complete. You're officially the owner now. He took a deep breath, straightening his jacket as he stepped out of the car. The weight of the signed contracts in his briefcase felt like justice waiting to be served. The former owner's car pulled up right on time, as required by the contract. The old man looked confused to see the businessman approaching. Clearly, he hadn't connected the dots between last night's rejected customer and today's mystery buyer. The realization began to dawn on his face as they drew closer to each other. "You," the former owner started, but the businessman cut him off with a calm smile. "Shall we go inside?" he suggested, gesturing toward the entrance. "After all, we have an announcement to make." His tone was professional, but firm. The former owner nodded slowly, understanding washing over his features. As they approached the entrance, the guard straightened up, recognizing last night's unwelcome visitor. The taller guard stepped forward, hand raised to block the way, but froze when he saw the former owner accompanying him. "Good evening, gentlemen," the businessman said pleasantly. "Would you mind gathering all staff for a quick meeting? We have some important news to share." He turned to the former owner. "Would you do the honors of confirming this request?" The guards looked uncertainly at their former boss, who nodded weakly. Inside, the maitre d' was already hurrying over, his face shifting from irritation to confusion as he took in the scene. The businessman could hear whispers spreading through the restaurant as staff members noticed something unusual was happening. "Perhaps we could use the private dining room," the businessman suggested, his voice carrying an authority that no one dared question now. The maitre d' led the way automatically, though his usual smooth confidence had vanished. As the staff gathered, the businessman could see the young waitress from last night standing near the back, her eyes wide with recognition. A few other employees who'd witnessed his rejection were whispering among themselves, putting the pieces together. The former owner cleared his throat. "Everyone, I have an announcement to make. As of today, La Maison Rouge has a new owner." He gestured to the businessman, and the room fell silent. The guards, standing near the door, suddenly found the floor very interesting to look at. The businessman stepped forward, his presence commanding the room's attention. "Thank you. Yes, I am the new owner of La Maison Rouge. Some of you may remember me from last night, when I was denied entry despite having a reservation." He paused, letting the implications sink in. "That experience, while unfortunate, showed me that this restaurant needs change, not in its cuisine, which is excellent, but in its culture." He opened his briefcase, removing several folders. "Starting tomorrow, we'll be implementing new training programs and policies. Every employee will have the opportunity to be part of our new vision for La Maison Rouge, a vision of excellence in both food and hospitality, where every guest is treated with respect." The room was dead silent. The maitre d's face had gone pale, while the guards shifted uncomfortably. But the businessman noticed something else too. Several staff members, including the young waitress, were nodding slightly, hope flickering in their eyes. "I believe in second chances," he continued, his voice firm but not unkind. "Those who are willing to embrace change and treat all our guests with equal respect will have a place here. Those who aren't—" He let the sentence hang in the air, its meaning clear. He gestured to his HR director and PR manager who had just entered the room. "These are your new management contacts. They'll be working with each of you over the coming weeks. For tonight, we continue service as usual, but with one important difference." He smiled, making eye contact with each person in the room. "From this moment forward, every guest who walks through our doors will be treated with the same high level of respect and hospitality. No exceptions." As the staff began to disperse, still processing the shocking turn of events, the businessmen caught snippets of their whispered conversations. Some were worried, others excited, but all knew that La Maison Rouge would never be quite the same. And that, he thought to himself, was exactly the point. The next morning arrived with a buzz of nervous energy at La Maison Rouge. The businessman had arranged for the restaurant to open 2 hours later than usual, giving time for the first staff meeting under new management. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows, illuminating faces both anxious and curious about what changes lay ahead. The young waitress from the previous nights sat in the front row, her notebook ready. Behind her, other staff members whispered among themselves, stealing glances at their new owner. The guards and maitre d' sat stiffly in the back, their usual confidence notably absent. "Good morning, everyone," the businessman began, standing before his assembled staff. "Before we open today, I want to share something personal with you." He paused, looking around the room. "I started my career as a dishwasher in a small diner. The owner there taught me something valuable. Every person who walks through a restaurant's doors carries their own story, their own dreams. Our job isn't just to serve food, it's to make everyone feel valued." He pulled up a presentation on the newly installed screen. "We're not just changing policies today, we're changing our entire approach to hospitality. Every guest, regardless of their appearance or background, deserves our best service. This isn't just good ethics, it's good business." The HR director stepped forward, distributing new employee handbooks. "Inside, you'll find our updated service standards and anti-discrimination policies. But more importantly, you'll find resources for professional development. We're investing in each of you who wants to grow with us." One of the line cooks raised his hand hesitantly. "Sir, does this mean we're changing our menu too?" There was worry in his voice, worry about losing the restaurant's identity, its prestige. The businessman smiled. "Our food will remain excellent. In fact, we're expanding our menu to include more diverse influences while maintaining our French foundation. Our head chef will be collaborating with renowned chefs from various backgrounds to create special fusion dishes." The young waitress raised her hand next. "What about our regular customers?" "Some of them," she trailed off, clearly thinking about certain wealthy patrons who'd grown accustomed to preferential treatment. "They'll learn that true luxury isn't about exclusivity, it's about excellence available to all who appreciate it," he replied firmly. "Those who don't share our new values are welcome to dine elsewhere." As the meeting progressed, the businessman noticed a subtle shift in the room. The initial tension began to ease as staff members asked questions and shared their own experiences. Even some of the more resistant employees began showing signs of interest when he outlined the new benefit packages and promotion opportunities. The maitre d' finally spoke up, his voice quieter than usual. "I've worked here for 15 years. I thought I knew everything about fine dining, but," he paused, struggling with his words, "yesterday was a wake-up call. I want to learn to do better." The businessman nodded appreciatively. "That's exactly the attitude we need. Change isn't about forgetting our past, it's about building a better future." He gestured to his PR manager, who began distributing press packets. "We're launching a new campaign, Excellence for All. Our reputation won't suffer from being more inclusive, it will grow stronger." As the morning went on, they practiced new greeting protocols, reviewed customer service scenarios, and discussed how to handle various situations. The guards, who'd been quietly observing, finally engaged when the topic turned to making guests feel welcome rather than intimidated. "We've been doing it wrong," the taller guard admitted. "We were taught to be suspicious first, welcoming second. It should be the other way around." Near the end of the meeting, the businessman unveiled the new uniforms, elegant and professional, but designed for comfort and practicality. "These represent our fresh start," he explained. "When you wear these, remember that you're not just serving food, you're part of a movement to change how the fine dining world treats people." The staff began trying on their new uniforms, the atmosphere now markedly different from the start of the meeting. There was laughter, conversation, and a sense of possibility in the air. The young waitress approached the businessman with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she said simply. "I've wanted to speak up so many times when I saw people being turned away, but I was afraid of losing my job. Now, for the first time, I'm proud to work here." As the staff prepared for opening, the businessmen watched them working together, helping each other with their new uniforms, practicing their new welcome phrases. He saw the maitre d' teaching a busboy how to properly greet guests, this time with genuine warmth rather than selective courtesy. The transformation was just beginning, but already he could feel the change in the air. La Maison Rouge was becoming what it should have been all along, a place where excellence in food was matched by excellence in humanity. Last edited 1 day ago. 1 month had passed since the ownership change, and La Maison Rouge was buzzing with a different kind of energy. The businessman stood in the kitchen, watching his staff prepare for another busy evening. The changes were already showing remarkable results, not just in numbers, but in the whole atmosphere of the place. The old guard who used to stand at the door was now working as a hospitality trainer, teaching new staff members how to make guests feel genuinely welcome. His experience in spotting potential issues had been redirected into ensuring guest safety and comfort rather than discrimination. The kitchen had transformed too. The head chef, initially skeptical about change, had embraced the opportunity to expand his culinary horizons. Tonight, they were unveiling a new menu that blended classic French techniques with diverse global influences. The aromas filling the kitchen told a story of tradition meeting innovation. First seating is in 30 minutes, called out the former maitre d', now the guest relations manager. His transformation had been the most surprising. After the initial shock wore off, he'd thrown himself into learning about inclusive hospitality, even organizing weekly staff discussions about breaking down prejudices in fine dining. The young waitress who'd shown compassion on that first night had been promoted to lead server, training new staff in the art of making every guest feel special. Remember, she told a group of new hires, when someone walks through that door, we don't see their clothes or their background. We see a person who deserves an amazing dining experience. The businessmen checked the reservation book. They were fully booked again, but this time the dining room would truly reflect the city's diverse population. Local food critics had taken notice, praising not just the excellent cuisine, but the welcoming atmosphere that made fine dining accessible without compromising quality. A tech industry magazine had featured the restaurant in a story about business transformation, highlighting how treating people with dignity could also be good for the bottom line. Revenues had actually increased since the change in policy, proving that exclusivity wasn't necessary for success. As evening approached, the businessman gathered his staff for their nightly pre-service meeting. These gatherings had become a restaurant tradition, a time to share stories and celebrate successes. Tonight, a server spoke about an elderly couple who'd celebrated their 50th anniversary at La Maison Rouge the previous evening. They told me they'd tried to dine here 5 years ago, but were turned away, the server said, emotion in her voice. Last night, they said it was worth the wait because the experience was perfect. The husband had tears in his eyes when he thanked us. The businessman nodded, remembering his own experience of rejection. That's why we're here, he said, not just to serve food, but to create moments that matter. Every person who walks through our doors has a story, and we're now part of those stories in a positive way. The kitchen staff had prepared family meal, another new tradition where all employees ate together before service. The head chef had made a point of incorporating dishes that reflected the diverse backgrounds of his kitchen team. Tonight's meal included a fusion of French and Vietnamese flavors created by one of the line cooks sharing his grandmother's recipes. As they ate together, the businessman looked around at his team. The barriers that had once divided front of house from back of house, servers from management, had dissolved. In their place was a genuine sense of community, of shared purpose. The former owner had visited last week, barely recognizing the restaurant he'd sold. The tense, exclusive atmosphere had been replaced by warm lighting, genuine smiles, and the sound of diverse languages and laughter filling the dining room. Even he had to admit the change was for the better. A local business school had asked to write a case study about the transformation. The businessman agreed, seeing it as another opportunity to spread the message that inclusivity and excellence could go hand in hand. Students would learn how one moment of discrimination had sparked a revolution in fine dining. As the first guests began to arrive, the businessman watched his team swing into action. Every door opening was greeted with genuine warmth, every guest treated like they belonged. The magic of fine dining hadn't been lost, it had been made stronger by becoming more accessible. He thought back to that night of rejection just a month ago. Sometimes the worst moments in life could lead to the best changes if you had the courage to transform them into opportunities. La Maison Rouge hadn't just changed its policies, it had changed hearts and minds, one meal at a time. 6 months had passed since that fateful night of rejection, and La Maison Rouge had become a symbol of transformation in the restaurant industry. The businessman stood in the crowded dining room, watching as guests from all walks of life enjoyed their meals together. The sound of varied languages and laughter filled the air, creating a symphony of genuine hospitality. The restaurant had just received its latest accolade, a prestigious award for excellence in both cuisine and inclusive hospitality. But the real reward wasn't the crystal trophy sitting in the entrance. It was the stories that kept pouring in from guests and staff alike. Tonight was extra special. The restaurant was hosting a charity dinner, with proceeds going to a scholarship fund for underprivileged youth interested in culinary careers. The event had sold out in hours, drawing a diverse crowd of food lovers, industry professionals, and community leaders. The former guards, now working as community outreach coordinators, were leading tours of the kitchen for aspiring young chefs from local schools. Their faces beamed with pride as they explained how the restaurant had transformed from a symbol of exclusivity to a beacon of opportunity. In the kitchen, the head chef was teaching a masterclass to a group of students from various backgrounds. The restaurant had started a mentorship program, opening doors that had long been closed to many passionate individuals. The chef's eyes lit up as he shared techniques that blended classical French cooking with diverse cultural influences. The businessman overheard a conversation between two elderly guests and the young waitress who'd shown compassion that first night. She was now the restaurant's training manager, responsible for ensuring every staff member understood the importance of treating all guests with equal respect. "We've been dining at fine restaurants for 40 years, one guest said, holding her partner's hand, but this is the first place where we felt truly welcomed for who we are, not just what we wear or how we look." The restaurant's success had sparked a movement in the industry. Other establishments had begun reaching out, asking for advice on creating more inclusive environments. The businessman had started a consulting program, helping other restaurants transform their cultures while maintaining their unique identities. Local food critics had noticed the change too. Their reviews now praised not just the exceptional food, but the warm atmosphere that made fine dining accessible to everyone. The restaurant had maintained its prestigious reputation while redefining what luxury meant in the modern world. The former maitre d', who'd once turned people away based on appearance, had become one of the strongest advocates for change. He'd written an article for a leading hospitality magazine about his personal journey from prejudice to understanding. The piece had gone viral, sparking important conversations throughout the industry. As the evening progressed, the businessman watched a young couple being seated, their first time in a fine dining restaurant. The staff made them feel like honored guests, patiently explaining the menu and making recommendations. The couple's initial nervousness melted away, replaced by genuine enjoyment of the experience. The kitchen had evolved too. The menu now featured a perfect blend of traditional French cuisine and innovative fusion dishes. Every plate that left the kitchen told a story of cultural appreciation and culinary excellence. The restaurant had proved that inclusion didn't mean compromising quality, it meant enriching it. Near closing time, the businessman gathered his staff for their nightly meeting. These gatherings had become a cherished tradition, a time to share successes and learn from each other. Tonight, they celebrated more than just good service, they celebrated a vision of hospitality that had become reality. 6 months ago, he began, looking at each face in the room, we set out to prove that excellence and inclusion could go hand in hand. Today, we're not just serving meals, we're changing lives, one dinner at a time. The staff erupted in applause, their faces reflecting the pride they felt in their work. Many had been skeptical of the changes at first, but now they couldn't imagine working any other way. The restaurant had become more than just a workplace, it was a family, united in their mission to make fine dining truly accessible to all. As the last guests left for the evening, the businessman stood at the entrance, remembering the night he'd been turned away. That moment of humiliation had led to something beautiful, a transformation that went beyond business success to touch hearts and change minds. La Maison Rouge had become living proof that when you open your doors to everyone, magic happens. The restaurant wasn't just serving food anymore. It was serving hope, dignity, and the promise that everyone deserves a seat at the table.